What are you
Gross.
doing?
So you can't ask those
Torpedoes,
penguins, but you
direct
can ask the Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, which reported in 2019
Torpedoes,
a
direct
global underpreparedness for the increase of natural disasters, saying, current risk management institutions and approaches are appropriate for handling individual hazards, but are not fit for handling systemic risk on the scale indicated by the steep rise in climate-related disaster events. They cited the underwhelming response to the current COVID crisis as an example of warning going unheeded, saying, at the same time, almost all nations failed to prepare appropriately to prevent the wave of death and illness unleashed across the globe by the COVID-19 pandemic, despite many urgings to do so from a plethora of experts, including WHO, and others. It is baffling that we willingly and knowingly continue to sow the seeds of our own destruction, despite the science and evidence that we are turning our only home into an uninhabitable hell for millions of people. Boy, I think maybe, when a professor at the Center for Research on the Epidemiology of Disasters and the representative of the head of the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction describe our future world as an uninhabitable hell for millions of people, that's kind of bad. And again, I want to emphasize, it is avoidable. While we may not be able to completely prevent climate change, since it's already happening, and stop all the climate disasters from happening, since they're already happening, not only can we change course on global warming by reducing emissions, we can also prepare ourselves better for disasters we can't prevent.
The ship is on fire!
For example, Bangladesh and India saved the lives of tens of thousands from dying during a super cyclone. In May and June of 2020, India and Bangladesh were hit by two massive cyclones.
Torpedoes,
Cyclone
get ahead.
Amphan, the strongest storm ever recorded in the Bay of Bengal, and Cyclone Nisarga. These cyclones are becoming more powerful due to
Torpedoes,
climate
get ahead.
change, scientists warn, as they have been warning since the 70s. India had already been hit by a super cyclone in 1999, which killed 10,000 people in Odisha. In response, India implemented a new disaster preparedness organization called the National Disaster Response Force. Due to mass evacuation and preparedness efforts, the program seems to have paid off. The Amphan cyclone killed around 100 people, and the Nisarga cyclone killed 6 people. Obviously, it's not good news since people still died, but fewer people died than in the past. And hey, I feel like fewer human deaths is something to feel good about. Kinda. Maybe? Serotonin, go! Just gotta squeeze that serotonin out. Oh, I peed a little bit. No, I peed a lot. And a little bit of hope, you know, and some pee. Hope and pee. A lot of pee, a little bit of hope. And now that I've used up the rest of my piss hope rations for the day, let's talk for a moment about how the US is.
The enemy is about to win.
Now, I want to preface this by saying the people who will most disproportionately suffer due to climate change is the global south. That is, the poorer nations that richer nations exploit and who bear the least responsibility for global warming. But that doesn't mean people in the US won't suffer, huzzah! Especially ethnic minorities and underserved communities who, the EPA reports, are most likely to bear the brunt of climate disasters. But in general, Americans are more vulnerable to climate change than you might expect. First of all, the majority of the U.S. population is concentrated along the coasts, the areas most prone to hurricanes and flooding. Disasters can also compound. Drought and extreme heat leads to wildfires, which leads to air pollution, and this can be happening in the West, while simultaneously tornadoes hit the Midwest and hurricane winds and flooding hit the East Coast. Compound disasters are more likely as extreme weather events increasingly become the norm due to global warming. Having multiple disasters at once can shock our infrastructure and make it more difficult for the government to respond, which it already does an extremely shitty job during a disaster, like, say, like a pandemic. Like we talked about earlier in the episode, along with infrastructure problems and shitty power grids, like we talked about earlier in the episode. It all ties together, doesn't it? Wow. It's just layers and layers of interweaving shit, like some kind of awful tiramisu. Tiramiscat. Disgusting. But maybe I worry too much. You know, maybe climate is just like stocks. Like how former professor and bedroom sanitation expert Jordan B. Peterson puts it, the climate models can predict the past, just like models of the stock market. I defy these modelers to predict one stock accurately for 1 year and to bet their own money on the outcome. First of all, great point from the doctor about how climate